Hi, everyone. We've got some folks funneling in now, so we're going to give it a couple minutes or a couple seconds before we start introductions. Okay, I think we can get the evening started. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our first ever Access You webinar. The topic of this evening's webinar is disability and sexuality, and I think we all know that that topic is very important and isn't discussed nearly as often as it should be, so we're really excited. Before we dive in, I want to go over a few of the technical aspects of this event format. The webinar is being recorded and is going to be uploaded to our YouTube channel following today's session. So if you can't catch the whole thing, be sure to check out our YouTube channel. Please note that captioning and interpreting services are available throughout the presentation. So to utilize those closed caption features, you're going to click the CC button on the bottom ribbon of your Zoom screen. We also are going to be actively monitoring our Q&A and chat box, so please don't hesitate to ask any questions you have as they arise throughout the presentation. And if you see a question from someone else that you would also like to be answered, you can give that an upvote and we'll prioritize it during the Q&A portion of the presentation. Once I give some brief introductions, we'll move into the presentation portion for about 15 minutes. And then the last 10 minutes of the event, we're going to have a live Q&A. Now that the logistics are out of the way, allow me to introduce myself. For those of you who don't know me, I am Katie Fields, and I am the College Outreach Coordinator at Starkloff Disability Institute in St. Louis, Missouri. I'm a person with invisible disabilities, and I use she, her pronouns. And as a visual description, I'm a white woman with long brown hair, olive skin. I've got dark glasses on my face. I'm in a white room, wearing a cream cardigan and a red colored shirt with white text that says, "Diversity includes disability." I coordinate Access You, and that's a free career development program for college students with disabilities. And in the program, students receive individualized career support through one-on-one meetings, workshops, events, and students in the program gain the skills they need to become competitive internship seekers. And the program really focuses on those disability-specific career needs of our students, like when and how to disclose a disability to an employer, how you might identify workplace accommodations, how to determine which employers are most inclusive, and more. So students who engage in the curriculum and devote time to honing those career development skills, we can then assist them in identifying potential internship opportunities with our many corporate partners. Access U also hosts social opportunities for students to come together in fellowship, to share their experiences, resources, to strengthen their disability pride. And right now the program's being conducted virtually. So if it's something that you might be interested in learning more about, I invite you to email me at kfields@starkloff.org. That's KFIELDS@starkloff. STARKLOFF.org, or to visit our website, which I'll drop in the chat. Now, I'm really thrilled to introduce you all to our speaker this evening, Chris Worth. Thank you so much, Chris, for being with us tonight. We're so excited to have you here with us. I'm going to read your bio, Chris, to our audience so they know a little bit about you. Chris Worth is a community educator and organizer with over 15 years of experience. He is one of the founding members of the Coalition for Truth and Independence, which is a radical grassroots disability rights organization based in St. Louis. Over the last 7 years, Chris has helped organize and implement a class in sexuality, gender, and disability at the Brown School of Social Work at Washington University here in St. Louis also. Chris is an internationally known visual artist with paintings hanging in 2 countries outside of the United States. He received a Bachelor in Fine Arts and a Master of Arts degree in painting from Marshall University. Additionally, his artwork holds a prominent place in many private collections, and recently his work became part of a permanent collection at the Missouri History Museum. Congratulations, Chris, that's awesome. It's hard to not be impressed when reading a bio like yours, I have to say that. So we're really glad to have you, and I'm sure everybody's eager to hear everything you have to say, so the floor is now yours. Take it away.
So, not to add more to my bio, but I think it's important to note that I am currently working on a PhD in working on a master's, and then will enter my PhD in the fall in teaching and learning processes at University of Missouri St. Louis. It's also important and a good jumping off point to note that part of what part of my work that went into the History Museum was part of their expansion of talking about queer artists with disabilities. So as a part of expanding the History Museum's collection, my work and my sort of small piece of the world adds to the intersectionality, which is sexuality and gender. So to start us out, I am obviously white, and I'm very privileged in that, right? Although I have had my struggles, right? And we'll get into just a little bit of that tonight. I want to point out, before we even get the ball rolling, that my privilege looks nothing like if I were a person of color who's dealing with the same things, right? So I've had a lot of privilege because of my perceived maleness and my definite whiteness. So I just want to make sure that that's clear for everybody as we move forward. Okay, so I'm just, my wife tells me, just tell your story. So I'm going to start there, and then we'll weave in some other things over the next few minutes. So be thinking about questions and jot them down, and make sure that you don't go away thinking with some thoughts. And Katie's going to provide my contact information as well. So don't be shy. Also, I must note that some of the stuff that I'm going to share is very sensitive, right? So, but note that I am comfortable sharing it, but there might be some triggering things to it because, you know, in order to really embrace our full self, I feel like, just as myself, just as the speaker tonight, I feel like that you also have to kind of explore the nitty-gritty parts of who we are. That's about full inclusion, right? Right. So with all that said, I am so glad to be here. And let's get it kicked off by saying, let me take a deep breath. I'm kind of nervous. I was born in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and almost immediately, my parents had a lot of difficulty, you know, because I was born into a situation where I needed a lot of support. and they were not at a place in their life that allowed for that support to be readily available, right? And so they put me in foster care and put me up for adoption. While I was in that situation, I experienced a lot of different types of abuse, right? I experienced a lot of things happening without my consent, right? Um, from a very early age, I want you to hold on to the word consent because it can be a really magical word, a really magical word. Um, it can be liberating, and also, um, you know, um, it's not always understood by a by by mass culture. We're getting there, but I'll get more into that in a minute. So eventually, I was adopted um, by um, um, I'll say an upwardly mobile family from West Virginia, and in that adoption, um, my dad um, probably within the first um, um, 2 years of that adoption, my dad started talking to me because I was adopted at 11. So I was a preteen, and he started talking to me almost immediately about sexuality and gender. I had been I had been really sort of um, isolated by the system and um, treated very much like I would never learn, very much warehoused. Um, again, my experience wasn't as hard as it is for some people, but I was very much warehoused, right? So people didn't really think I could learn. So not a whole bunch of teaching happened. So my dad recognized that here I was a preteen, and I was expressing myself already in very different ways. I told him when I was 13 that I was bisexual. He had I wouldn't say had a he wasn't necessarily closed-minded, but he also didn't want to make it a part of um, our regular dialogue. So even though he was trying to teach me and trying to be progressive, it was hard for him um, to wrap his mind around my bisexuality. And note that I'm older. I'm how old am I? I'm asking my wife. 40, 43. And so my experience with um, sexuality and gender was very limited, right? As far as expression goes, um, uh, coming up. Remember, I came from very rural West Virginia, even though I was adopted from the inner cities of Bridgeport, Connecticut. So I had a very rural experience, but I almost immediately knew, guys, I knew that I was attracted to both um, genders, both genders as I knew them at the time, right? We know now that gender is much more expansive, right? See my he, him, his identifier as far as my gender goes, right? So we understand it now as much more expansive. But historically, for me, I didn't have those opportunities, right? I didn't have that opportunity because we didn't. If we knew about those um, uh, genders, it wasn't part of the mass conversation like it is now. I think. For me, it wasn't. And remember, I came from a very sheltered experience, adopted, and I wouldn't call my adoption sheltering, but I would call it regimented, regimented. So my parents were always working on my physical well-being. They thought that I would never go to college, right? They thought that I wouldn't achieve sort of intellectually. So they were trying to give me what they thought I most needed to survive in the world, right? Which was physical capability, right? So a lot of walking, a lot of therapy, a lot of, and it really felt like bullshit sometimes as a teenager, right? I mean, I was like really crying out for some expression and not getting very far because my life was so regimented. And but did that keep me from expressing? No, no. So there's a lot of myths. There's a lot of myth, and I'm not. I don't think my parents fell for this, but or my dad wouldn't have done some very rudimentary sex ed with me. But I think that even for him, this held on. There's a myth that says that people with disabilities are somehow asexual, and this is where I fell. I think for in the minds of a lot of people, the over sexual. So does that make sense? And that myth follows us all the way through history, right? From probably the the Renaissance and before, this myth has existed that somehow people with disabilities are going to be like predatorial, right? I don't know if that's a word, but in this day and age, we'll just make it up. So, but we can tell you, maybe tonight needs to be considered a myth busting night, because I wasn't predatorial. I was a kid who wasn't given a lot of outlets before adoption, and so I would kiss a boy, right? I would be expressive, and sometimes I wouldn't always be appropriate. We'll talk more about appropriateness as we move forward, right? But that's because even with my dad's rudimentary education, right, sex ed, he was trying, it wasn't enough. And it sounded punitive. If you do this, then you're going to get this disease. If you do this, then you're going to get this person pregnant or something like that. Very, I mean, remember I'm how old? 43. So I'm older. And so our sort of frame of reference has changed. But I bet you, for all the college students in the audience, it hasn't changed that much. It hasn't changed that much. And for some, I know for folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities, I have a kind of developmental disability, cerebral palsy. People focus on or have focused on over sexualizing or under sexualizing us and continue to do so, right? But my point is really, people are going to find a way to express their gender. they're going to find a way to express their sexuality, right? And now I'm fast forwarding. I told our interpreter I'm going to be like a sort of a back and forth with my words. So and sexuality and gender can be, if we take it out of this idea of pathology, it can be a place of power. It can be a place of power. So I started organizing. I think Katie said I was an organizer. She gave a smaller window, but I've been doing it in some way for like 40 years. 40, I'm old, right? Not 40, 30. I have a bad sense of time. But in that time, I have begun to, and some of it very recently in coming to St. Louis, I have begun to see that the power of of expressing my sexuality can be a thing that changes every space we're in. Whether it be a workspace, a play space, a romantic space. So the idea is that, when I was a child, I did not feel loved, right? We're going to talk about love tonight. I did not feel very loved, right? So much of my expression of love came out in ways that might not have been appropriate, right? But instead of schooling me, the system often, and I don't mean schooling in a negative way, but the system often penalized me, if that makes sense. So again, I'm fast forwarding. At the rehabilitation, so I went through school. I started in mainstream school at 11 years old, right? Because in Connecticut, no one had bothered. I mean, very little time was spent teaching me to read or write. So here I was in school at 11, and by the time I was in 8th grade, I was 17. Now, I don't share that with everyone. I'm still very sensitive about that, right? And even in a mainstream situation, I wasn't very mainstream, right? I was put off in a corner, right? And guess what was happening to my body? Guess what was happening to my body? I was getting hair places that I had never thought I would get hair. I was feeling things about people, even though I had an idea that I was somehow sexually different when I was younger. As soon as those hormones hit, it heightened all that. So that by the time I was in 8th grade, I was a mess. No one had taught me about college. I mean, I had learned about it because a lot of my adopted family had been to college, right? So I wanted to go, and I eventually got to go, but that's a whole other talk, right? That's not why I'm here. But let me go back again. I'm going to be the messiest speaker tonight, right? So before I got sent I went to college. I went to a vocational rehab, had a physical campus in West Virginia. It doesn't exist anymore. But at that physical campus, guess I did academic work in the morning, and I oscillated between, you guys are gonna laugh, sex ed in the afternoon and shop like wood shop. Even though I'm a painter, I am not a wood craftsman, right? So we got our fill of filling out very punitive sounding worksheets, right? About like if you mess up and you get herpes, or if you mess up and get things that I never even, it's so punitive. I'm going to use the word, I hope no one's upset about this, but I'm going to use the word bullshit again, right? Because what it did was it made me afraid, but it also, drum roll please, nobody's here except for me and the interpreter. Thank you. It also made me curious. Believe it, I was 18, 19. It made me very curious. So I was sneaking boys into my dorm room. I was sneaking girls into the park, right? We were sneaking around together. Um, um, and I hope that in that time I was getting consent, right? Um, part of tonight is going to be me being vulnerable, but I had never been taught about consent, so I had to learn about it. And I came from a culture where they didn't think I should be having sex anyway. So of course they're not going to teach me about consent. Everything that I was hearing at vocational rehab in West Virginia, mind you, was sex negative, sex negative, sex negative, sex negative. And so I was doing a lot of exploring. I was doing, I was having a lot of fun. I had boyfriends or people I thought were my boyfriends. I had girlfriends, and the rehab center was a real experimental moment. Now, do I wish that I had had more knowledge? Of course, more real knowledge, right? Not just worksheets, but more real knowledge. So, but let me tell you that the rehab center was so punitive around sexual expression. And we're not even talking gender expression. One of my first partners was today he probably or they probably would be they them, and a person who identifies as they them. But then we hadn't really thought about that, right? But at this rehab center, I've always been sort of I love porn, right? As a teenager, I loved porn. Um, um, it was an outlet for me, right? Well, they they being the powers that be at rehab raided my room, threw away all my porn, and chastised me, and I got written up. Um, but it was because I had not wanted to share my porn with an orderly that worked there, right? So think about what was happening there. Power dynamics, right? I'm I am a person with a disability. This person takes care of me. I refused them, right? I mean, they didn't necessarily want to they didn't want to have sex with me, but they wanted in my personal space, and I didn't have much of it. I don't know how many of you have a physical disability, but we don't have a lot of personal space, right? So when I said no, he wasn't used to hearing no, right? When I said that's mine and you can't watch it, he reported me, right? Now, I bring that up because that was on the cusp of me going to Marshall University, right? And learning about things like Take Back the Night, and that's a movement of sexual assault survivors, um, um, and sexual abuse survivors, um, to to really reclaim spaces. And I think, really, at Marshall University, I had my first healthy experience with boyfriends and girlfriends, right? Where it was I felt valued. Now, it was really hard as a person with a disability, especially one that kind of crossed into the queer community, right? I didn't kind of, I did. To not, I was sometimes, and this is just me, but I felt like um, many of my gay friends expected me to look perfect, expected me to be perfect. And it was very hard to find a boyfriend or a girlfriend, because um, because first of all, I didn't know much about disability rights, and I didn't see my sexual and gender identity as a part of the whole picture. We're always separating sexual identity and gender identity out from things. No, it's a it's the whole us. It's the it's the whole person. Say again.
Maria Montessori.
Maria, my wife just said it's very Montessori. She's an educator. Maria Montessori, look her up. But we're really, because we're constantly asked to parse out our identities, like, oh, deal with your cerebral palsy over here, deal with your queerness over here, and deal with your schooling over here. No, it's actually one messy, beautiful package, right? It's just like when we in the disability community say, oh, blind people can go to this organization, people with autism can go to this organization. I hope tonight we can understand that all of our identity goes into our sexual and gender, the power that we had in that expression. Does that make sense? Even our even our disability. So I began to really try to not. I went through a phase, and everyone does this. I think maybe I hope I'm not speaking for anyone, but I went through a phase where I wanted to reject the cerebral palsy. I didn't want to talk about it. I wanted to deny it. So that translated to me not liking my body, to me not liking my queerness, right? So there was a period where I went back and forth, um, um, uh, uh, am I gay? Am I straight? Am I bi? Right? And I mean, even up until I moved to St. Louis, my boyfriend, I had a long-term boyfriend named Philip. It was a very, very messy relationship. He was not very good to me physically, and but he was convinced that I just needed to say that I was gay. And I'm not bi. He was very, um, he was very, very adamant that I was just in denial. And the thing is, love doesn't work. Love doesn't work in silos. And it's much broader. It's much broader than our language, our English language allows us to think about. I'm a Buddhist, and a Catholic, and as a Buddhist, I think about like agape love, the love of the universe, right? But I went through years where I was trying to sell myself, right? I see some questions, and we'll get to those, I promise. Just keep loading them in. It's hard for me to answer right away, but we will, okay? Katie's helping me keep track. So keep those questions going. So the thing is, like, what made me begin to love myself in the fullest sense of the word and know that I was beautiful as I was, even in my imperfectness, right? So in a Buddhist tradition, we are constantly evolving into the people that we are. So if you think that you've got it all worked out as far as who you are, I would venture to guess that that doesn't end until we die, until our last breath. We are becoming. Now, so I was becoming, and I spent many years of very, not treating myself very well sexually, and not treating myself very well emotionally. And then I went, again, I'm going to be messy. I'm sorry to the interpreter. But I went through years of training as a community organizer, and I had not thought about, and this is going to be a shocker to you guys, the power of sexuality and gender in organizing, right? The power that, and I'm not saying that you have to express it all the time, right? But what I mean by power is on the lotus unfolding inside your spirit and understanding that you are beautiful. I still have issues with my own confidence, believe it or not. But what became apparent to me was that, and this was after I moved to St. Louis, so we're getting close to the end of the story, was that I could add something to talking about sexuality and gender, right, within organizing. And we could talk about sexuality and gender as a piece of a person's full identity, right? I don't care who you are. Bob, do people remember Bob Dole? Maybe not. But he was a politician, very, very like straight-laced. He was a sexual being, right? We all have something about that within us. Right? Now, some people are asexual, for real. Now, I happen to think, and I am not a certified sex educator, um, but I am a peer educator in that I've been teaching it for a while with the great team, right? I happen to think that even if you are asexual, right, you have there's a way that that energy um, filters out. And it could be your work, it could be your creative endeavors, that could be your work. I don't know, but there is no being that doesn't have some sort of pulse, some sort of creative pulse around sexuality and gender. And one thing we've noticed in my work, one thing I've noticed, I sounded like I was talking about myself in third person, I mean, is that people with disabilities are taken advantage of, right? And we exist in a world where that's a possibility, but that's a possibility for anyone. The key to change that, and I believe that this really is the key to change it. Now, turning the key is sometimes hard. Even I slip up. I've been taken advantage of since I had this revelation, right, about the whole person, right? Um, but even I'm getting teary-eyed, but even turning the key um, changes the paradigm. So, and the thing that turns the key, sorry, interpreter, is education, is radical education and radical truth and sex positivity. Now, what I mean by sex positivity, do I mean that we just masturbate anywhere we want to all the time? No, no, please don't go away thinking that. I mean that we there are times for that, right? There are times and places that are comfortable for us to express our full needs and desires. And they might not be around masturbation, but you know, in the state of Missouri, there are still people who are mandated by the courts that they cannot express themselves in that way, right? So you might think, oh, he just wanted to say masturbation. No, I didn't. It's a real thing. There are systems in place to keep people with disabilities from being able to express their full self. And we're still at the cusp. We're still at the cusp for a lot of people with disabilities not to be put in the gender boxes. The female and male gender boxes are they're so exaggerated in our system, right? We kind of get squished into there, right? And we kind of get especially if we're people with intellectual disabilities or perceived um, uh, 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 perceived, help me, Joel, perceived um, weakness, right? We get pushed, right? And this is the way we need to be, right? Well, we need to break out of those boxes, right? And let me tell you, I didn't learn about the word queer. I'm doing it again, but I didn't learn about the word queer till I went to a conference. I was teaching at Marshall University and organizing in the coal fields of Appalachia, and I went to oh, um, uh, um, a conference framing framing the devastation of coal mining in Appalachia. But at that conference, people were tabling around being queer, like talking about queerness. And that was liberating to me, hearing that word. I know that sometimes we in the disability community, we're afraid of adding another label because they're so heavy on us, right? They're so heavy on us, right? But that that word queer opened things up for me, right? I didn't have to be straight. I didn't have to be bi even. I didn't have to be gay. I could be something on a paradigm. Something on a paradigm. Now, a paradigm is the right term, right, Julie?
Chris, I'm giving you your 5-minute warning.
Oh, it's already holy.
Take 7 minutes. You're good.
So, honest. My wife says spectrum, but even that had to come to pass for me. Even I had to get used to using that term, even in its liberation, and until I worked with Susan Sturritz at WashU and some of the great minds and some of the great members of CTI around sexuality and gender, I didn't even understand the full expanse of it. So in the end, and I hope we have questions, and if we don't, and if you're shy about them, I'll answer any question, let me tell you. But in the end, I want you to know that education made all the difference. Education made all the difference. Now, does that mean that if I get educated, does that mean that I won't be susceptible to people wanting to do wrong, wanting to take advantage? No, but it gives me an eye towards liberation. All right, and lastly, in your work, in your life, right? Your full self needs love. Love yourself. My cerebral palsy is a very big part of what makes me the sexy person I am. Katie?
I love that ending. Can I just say that? We've got some great questions. Chris, thank you so much for that presentation and for being so transparent and vulnerable with us. It's really appreciated. So let's just get into some of these questions. I see one that says, what does it mean when you use the word warehouse to refer to your experiences in foster care?
Well, I was in big homes. I was in a special school where I was sort of put away. When we use the word warehouse, we mean put away. By we, I don't mean that I'm self-absorbed. I mean that people literally say we. People literally say warehouse. It means to be put away, to be sort of. I was very much a number in foster care, less a number than some people, right? I have a brother who went through hell and much more than me. But I still was treated like a number. I was warehoused. Does that make sense?
I think it does, yeah. How do you deal with the feelings of being infantilized by the people at the vocational rehab center? Did it make it hard for you to learn more about consent when you felt that your own consent or wishes were violated?
Okay, I didn't. Somebody else. You should be on this side of the screen. Yes, yes, yes. So by and this happens to me regularly. I'm still in counseling for this. This infantilization creeps up in our in our culture, and sometimes I put it on myself. But as far as rehab, it was very stunting. But I have a lot of, and this has a lot of privilege tied to it. We could talk about this, but I have a lot of grit, right? If somebody says do this, and then doesn't explain why, I will often say, fuck you, you know? I mean, nicely, but you know what I mean. Katie, was that inappropriate?
No, I think you're just fine. Another individual asks, do you know of any online support groups or community groups for queer individuals with disabilities? I would love to have that as a personal resource, but also as a resource I can provide to college students.
Tell you what, I could I use a lot of, and my wife also uses a lot, the Queer Exchange on Facebook. Has anyone heard of that? And it's not just about exchanging goods, it's about a lot of support comes out of it. So I could pass it on to Katie, who can pass it on to you.
Great. And we can throw that link in the chat. Can you say what it is one more time?
It's the so my wife just said queer roundtables, but the Queer Exchange.
Okay.
And if you look that up on Facebook, it should just pop up.
Okay. Great. Another question we've got, do you have any thoughts about how people, especially folks with disabilities and queer folks, can reduce any feelings of shame they have about their sexuality?
Well, I can tell you that it's always a process, right? But I know that meditation and talking about it, right? So inward dialogue with myself and outward dialogue, talking about what I'm good at, talking about how it informs my approach, makes all the difference. Does that make sense? I know that seems broad, but too often we tamp that stuff down, right? Because we're not, we're not good enough to brag a little bit. I'm not saying get a big head, right, Katie? I'm just saying, be, express, express, express. And understand that whatever your disability is a part of what makes you good at whatever you're doing, right? But and I'm not saying always look on the bright side. I hate people that do that, right? Because life isn't like that. It sucks. Sometimes with cerebral palsy, I pee my pants, right? Who wants that, right? Right? But also understand that there are good things about it. Be honest with yourself about both things. Yeah. Does that make sense? Did I help?
Yes, awesome answer. Thank you. I'm going to mark that as done. This individual asks, how practically can a person with a disability use both disability and sexuality as a strength? I think they wanted you to elaborate on that a little bit more.
So, how practically? So, I am a budding scholar, so I practically use it by writing about it, by bringing it into other spaces, um, um, by 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 illustrating that it is a source for my intellectual growth and my intellectual paralysis. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Was that good?
I, I think it covered the question. Another one we've got is, what is it like to move through queer spaces as a disabled person versus disabled spaces as a queer person? I love that question.
I love it. It's, at least for me, even as a white man who was adopted by a fairly wealthy family, it's hard to be in both spaces because we we parse out, like I said in the talk, we parse out those identities, and the parsing out is what makes it difficult, right? So why can't I see my cerebral palsy as part of my queerness, right? It is a part of it. It makes me the sexy person I am. All right, Katie, I know I keep asking you, was that good? But not that you're the arbiter of all truth, but
I think every answer you give is good. Maybe I'm biased. I think this is also a fantastic question. Do you have any advice for future healthcare practitioners who want to work with individuals with disabilities? I presume they mean when talking about, gender and sexual identity.
well, I know that we need more direct support providers in the state, just to give that a plug. But I would also say, stay away from infantilizing.
Mhm.
Ask a lot of questions and be okay. You have, when I was in school, in undergrad, um, not that I've ever been out of school very long, but in undergrad, we had nurses who would come to the naked, to the life drawing class, it was called, but they didn't want to draw from the nude body. Well, you have to be vulnerable. You have to be vulnerable. You have to, if you're expecting the person with a disability to be vulnerable with you, you have to be vulnerable with them. Does that mean to not have boundaries? Oh, we need boundaries. We need healthy boundaries, but it can be sex positive, and don't be afraid to wipe an ass. But it's tied in there.
I've got a few more questions for you. How can young people, particularly those with physical and mobility disabilities, embrace their sexuality when they don't get so much privacy?
I still struggle with that. My wife just groaned. I mean, because we have a full staff that comes in and out of here. Um, uh, I can speak for myself. I just try to make headspace, right? And I try to like be very um, um, straightforward with like when I want to go to bed. I go to bed sometimes an hour before Julie does, not just because I'm older, but because I want some time alone,
Mhm.
right? So you know, it calls us to be tougher with our, and put ourselves out there to be like, no, I need some time. Does that
Mhm.
make sense?
Yes, no, it completely does. Okay, last question for you. This person asks, where or what do you write about? Books, blogs, articles? So I guess they're wanting to know if you write about this topic where they can read more.
Well, um, um, okay. Well, I I am just now starting out. I'm a virgining. We love that word. Scholar, right? A budding scholar. So I'm just now really kind of um, uh, really embracing that. But there is my oh, that's weird. There is my Facebook, and I address a lot of issues there, and have written articles not so much about sexuality, but remember from our talk, it's all embedded in there. And if it's not, you know, you're fooling yourself if you're talking about the human experience. Sorry about that, Katie.
Oh, no, I think that was just great. And, you know, we've got some folks in the chat who might have extra questions. You're comfortable with me sharing your email in the chat, correct?
Yeah, sure. And then Katie, also, you can, I don't know if you can do this, but you can share my Facebook.
Okay, let me find it real quick. Okay, I'm going to paste that in the chat too. So if folks want to look you up on Facebook, they can do so.
Yeah, I have a lot of art and a lot of articles there. And I can always connect you with some radical thinkers.
Awesome.
But
Well, I think that last question wraps up our webinar, Chris. I just want to thank you so much for educating us, for sharing your story with us. I know that I'm walking away with this with, you know, I feel like more tools and knowledge that I need to embrace my own identity, which is great. And I hope that our audience took that away too. So thank you so much for sharing with us tonight.
I think just to give you a plug, this platform and the opportunities you have through Starclough Disability Institute are pretty amazing. I wish I had them when I was going into college.
It means a lot to hear you say that, Chris. Thank you so much.
Keep up the good work. Keep it radical, though.
Yeah, keep it radical. We're sure going to try. I want to thank all of our attendees for joining us tonight. I hope you know that you'll join us in future webinars that we offer. This is just the beginning, and we're going to dig deep into some really important topics. So I'm really excited for what we have to come next. I also want to let our Access U students on the call know that we're going to be inviting Chris to join us for an upcoming quarantine catch-up meeting. You know, if there's a desire to chat about this topic in a smaller group. So be on the lookout for an email about that. You know, and again, if you're interested in any of our programs, you can visit us at starkloff.org. That's STARKLOFF.org. I think this wraps it up. So thank you so much. I look forward to see you again, Chris. Thank you for joining us tonight. And I can't wait to do it again.
In a glass of water, but I really enjoyed this. Really enjoyed this. I can't wait to see everyone's faces.
Me too.